Out of all of the sports games that came out with the launch of the NES, the one that seemed to be the most suited for the hardware limitations present was golf. It's a slow-paced, simple game that requires solid aim and timing, but not a whole lot else. However, when put in context with the many action-packed games coming out at the time, it's not surprising that golf wasn't exactly as popular as it is today. Unlike baseball, soccer, and tennis, which all had upwards of 10 previous iterations on earlier consoles, there were only a small handful of golf-themed video games released up until this point. Also, they all looked and functioned terribly. For example, the Atari 2600's attempt at this sport is absolutely disgusting. The graphics, controls, and physics are all abysmal, but in typical Atari fashion, they do have a beautiful artist rendition of men and women playing golf on the box, not at all representative of what the game actually looks like. Nintendo's rendition was refreshing. The game was developed by HAL Laboratories, specifically by a single programmer, at least by his account, Satoru Iwata. Similar to tennis, golf was first released via the Versus system in October of 1984, featuring the same game that would come out on the NES in 1985. The main character, Mario, was a familiar face at this point. He had already been featured in Donkey Kong, pinball, tennis as the judge, and many other games. As always, he provided an anchoring point for players to get acquainted with the game. Versus Golf actually came in two iterations, Versus Stroke and Match Golf and Versus Ladies Golf. These both boiled down to the same game, but Ladies Golf featured women as the main characters rather than Mario, a silly attempt to appeal to an audience rarely targeted by video games at the time. The game contained 1 and 2 player modes, in which players would compete either with themselves or others to achieve the lowest score. The interface for the game was unlike anything that was made before it. Instead of a shoddy looking 2D course with the player plopped down on it like in the Atari or Magnavox Odyssey editions, almost akin to what one would expect from a game of mini-golf, Nintendo had a full visual of the course next to a small box with Mario and his clubs. The player had the option to change between several different clubs, all of which had different powers and angles in which the balls would be launched. In addition, a power bar was included, allowing the player to time their button press for different powered swings. This was a groundbreaking addition to the golf genre and would become a staple of almost all future golf games. It would also be the first game of its kind to include a to-scale view of the map. Mario took up an appropriate amount of space on the full view, rather than looking disproportionately large compared to the course. This helped the experience feel more like a real game of golf, rather than the mini-golf-like effect of previous titles. The controls still hold up, even by today's standards. The angles are quite accurate, the wind speed, another feature that made its debut on this title, acts appropriately, the courses are beautifully designed, and the variety of ways to make it through them greatly improve the replayability. There are also an astounding 18 holes present in this game, something that was thought to be impossible to achieve on an NES cart. However, Iwata was quite skilled in navigating data compression, as he would later recall. The sheer amount of courses helps the game feel fresh through successive playthroughs, as it forces the player to master more than a dozen unique designs in order to get the lowest score possible. Overall, golf is certainly one of the best sports games that came out at the NES's launch. Due to both its ingenuity and being one of the first entries of the golf genre, golf had a sizable impact on its successors. There weren't a ton of titles released on the NES, but it did get a sequel in NES Open Tournament Golf, released in 1991. This game included tons more courses, different character selections, a tournament mode, and generally better physics than its prequel. Something just about every golf title had included from this point forward was a power bar, from Link's 386 Pro for the PC to the Hyper Golf Devil's Course for the Sega Saturn. Another part of golf's legacy can be seen within Nintendo and HAL Laboratories themselves. Kirby's Dream Course was a mini-golf game developed by HAL that also drew on many of the mechanics introduced in the NES and Famicom release. While Nintendo has never officially remastered the original NES title, it is playable in Animal Crossing for GameCube via purchase from Red's Furniture Emporium and the e-reader cards that came out in 2003 for the Game Boy Advance. Of course, I can't talk about a sport without mentioning the Marioification technique Nintendo loves to implement. Starting on the N64, Nintendo introduced Mario Golf, featuring playable characters from all around the universe of Super Mario Bros., similar to NES Open Tournament Golf. The original game actually wasn't all that mechanically different from golf for the NES, but the series began innovating as it continued onwards. For example, the Game Boy Color port of Mario Golf played as an RPG rather than your typical golf game. Items made an appearance relatively late in this franchise, being introduced with the 3DS title, Mario Golf World Tour. The Switch entry, Mario Golf Super Rush, came out in 2021, so the series is still going strong. As far as Mario-themed sports titles go, the Mario Golf series has seen some real standout entries in its history. In 2006, all of the original courses present in the initial release of Golf were adapted into Wii Sports and re-released again as the classic series of Wii Sports Resort Golf. They were actually changed very little, if at all, from their original forms, which speaks to how well they aged. You may notice a theme here with Wii Sports. The sports released in 1985 gave a very solid foundation for all future releases. In fact, many games that include a sports mix utilize some combination of the four: tennis, golf, baseball, and soccer, at least before bowling became extremely popular with Wii Sports Bowling. This was, in part, due to the popularity of these games at the launch of the NES. Golf has its own part in this story, and Iwata's programming and its influence continues to be felt in golf titles released to this day. I do truly think that Golf was a hole-in-one.